Good morning. I'm Lori Matson, President and CEO of the Tri-City Regional Chamber. Thank you so much for attending the first session of the 2021 Tri-Cities Diversity Summit. When the first Tri-Cities Diversity Summit took place 4 years ago, the intent was to create open, meaningful dialogue about issues that affect business and residents in the region. Due to the COVID pandemic, we're presenting this event virtually for the second year. And although we're not gathering in person to have these conversations with each other, our hope is that everyone who watches the sessions this week will find opportunities to have open, meaningful dialogue within their workplace or peer groups. The Tri-City Regional Chamber of Commerce values diversity and views it as a strength in our society. As a champion for the business community, we believe that creating an inclusive environment is key to the growth and sustainability of the Tri-Cities. This year's Tri-Cities Diversity Summit features 4 listening sessions, a keynote presentation, and the announcement of the 2021 Tri-Cities Champion of Diversity Award recipients. This morning's first listening session is Dimensions of Diversity, A to Z. In this session, a panel of DEI experts will engage in an informative discussion about the various elements of diversity in their respective institutions: the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, Bechtel, and Washington State University Tri-Cities. Before we begin, I'd like to thank the premier sponsor of the Tri-Cities Diversity Summit, PNNL. We greatly appreciate their partnership during the past 4 years as the premier sponsor of this impactful event. Energy Northwest is a silver sponsor of the Tri-Cities Diversity Summit. Bob Schutz, CEO of Energy Northwest, has provided a message for today's attendees.
Good morning, and thank you all for being here today. Energy Northwest is proud to sponsor this Diversity Summit, and I thank the Chamber for addressing this important issue. In the wake of the George Floyd tragedy, many businesses took a closer look at the importance of diversity in their workplace. To meet the challenges of today and beyond, companies need to innovate. And to get real innovation, you need and want people who can think differently. Our goal at Energy Northwest is to understand diversity and inclusion holistically, embracing all of the ways that individuals bring their unique perspectives and backgrounds to the agency. When we talk about diversity and inclusion, a lot of people will focus on race and gender, but there are so many other equally important aspects. You need to look for and incorporate different experiences, backgrounds, and perspectives, and life histories, in addition to gender, race, and ethnicity. We must ensure equal opportunity in hiring, assignment, and promotion, as well as building a supportive environment that encourages the sharing of diverse viewpoints. Energy Northwest formed a Diversity and Inclusion Council in September of last year, and it's comprised of individuals with diverse backgrounds from across the agency and with a passion to understand and strengthen our culture, programs, and processes. This council helps the leadership team to identify and address those areas where we think we could improve. Now, Energy Northwest exists to provide our public power member utilities with reliable, carbon-free electricity and clean energy solutions. And we were able to do that because our greatest strength as an agency is with our people. We are a company that strives to make everyone feel welcome and whose individual contributions we value as the key to our success. And like all of our local businesses in the Tri-Cities community as a whole, we can only become stronger if we continue to cultivate and promote diversity in our daily lives. So thank you again. To learn more about us and what we are doing, please connect with us on social media or visit energy-northwest.com. Thank you.
Bob, thank you so much. What a great message for us as you help kick off our Tri-Cities Diversity Summit. We greatly appreciate your silver level sponsorship. Now to this morning's listening session, Dimensions of Diversity, A to Z. Let's welcome our moderator, Tanya Bowers. Tanya's experience in DEI work began in 1989. Both as a consultant and an in-house employee, she has led diversity change management efforts for not-for-profit organizations, educational institutions, corporations, and government agencies. Tanya is currently the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Equal Employment Opportunity Manager at the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. Welcome, Tanya. Joining Tanya this morning is Kevin Edwards. Kevin is the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer for Bechtel National Inc. Kevin is responsible for developing a vision, a strategic diversity, equity, and inclusion roadmap, and an enterprise plan to implement key program actions to support progress in Bechtel's DEI efforts. Welcome, Kevin. The final panelist for this session is Kausar Gwathari. Kausar is coordinator for the Mosaic Center for Student Inclusion at Washington State University TriCities. Kausar graduated with her Master's of Education in Student Development Administration from the Seattle University. Welcome, Kausar. I'll now turn it over to our great panel of experts. Thank you all for being here with us today.
Thank you so much, Lori. It is our pleasure to be with you this morning. I know I can say that on behalf of Kevin, Kausar, and myself. When we were first approached by Vice President Elizabeth Holt about this session, on the dimensions of diversity from A to Z, we thought it would make sense for us to not only talk about those dimensions of diversity, but to think about them in terms of how our institutions actually navigate those dimensions of diversity. I know for some of you, these dimensions of diversity may be a relatively new concept, so we are going to actually share with you a little bit more about this concept. And to do this, I am going to take you to my screen. Austin, if you would allow me to share screen right now, I would greatly appreciate that. We are going to the website of the American Association of University Women. And they have a wonderful explanation of these dimensions of diversity, which they define as anything that has been historically used to differentiate groups. And you see some of the categories that they list below. But one of the other concepts that they use to differentiate these 16 dimensions of diversity has to do with primary and secondary dimensions. Primary dimensions being those which cannot be changed, secondary dimensions being those which one has some ability to change. So we list those now for you on the screen so you can take a look at them. And I believe Elizabeth is also going to put into the chat, the link to those if you want to refer back to them as we have our conversation. So to kick this off, again, you can see it in my signature, but I just want to acknowledge my pronouns are she and her. I'm going to be going to my colleagues, Kevin and Kausar, as we go to this first question that we want to talk about. So Kevin and Kausar, I am hoping, starting with Kevin, can you please talk about how your institution navigates these different dimensions of diversity?
Sure, no problem. Thank you, Tanya. I hope everyone can hear me. For us, it's there's a couple things here. For our existing D&I roadmap, which includes all three elements of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're looking at it from a talent perspective as well as a cultural perspective. For us, from a talent perspective, it's really about representation and what do we need to do to understand how we exist based on these dimensions of diversity. When we look at it from a cultural perspective, the biggest work and the biggest game for us as an organization is to understand how do we respect the differences of each element of diversity that exists for us in the organization or outside in our communities that we serve. And to really get a feeling for what are the drivers within these communities based on the dimension of diversity that we need to work through. One key group that we lean on and work through our business resource groups. We have 6 of them. We probably will have some more coming along, but those are great communities that help us understand the particular community based on the dimension of diversity that exists for that community and their allies, and what are the things that we have to do in order for us to be able to drive what we want to drive and our talent, the pillar of our roadmap, we need to better understand what we have to do for the workplace and culture and inclusion piece. And then that would help greatly to drive and navigate these different dimensions of diversity.
That's terrific. And Kevin, if I could just ask a follow-up question, your business resource groups, can you share with us a little bit more about how they are organized or what particular dimensions of diversity they focus on?
Sure, absolutely. We have 6. I would love to give a shout out to our WTP WTCC project there in Richland. Our Women at Bechtel was the first BRG that existed there in Richland. And so for the last 7 or 8 years, it's been in existence. So we have one Women at Bechtel, which focuses on our women. We have Be Proud, which focuses on our LGBTQ plus community. We have Be Pro, which is a mixture of our early career talent, but it also now has transitioned into a research group that's going to hone in on those mid-career and senior level individuals in our organization to help that early career navigate and success and roadmap through our organization. We have Be Bold, which is our Black African American business resource group. We have Be Familiar, which is our Hispanic Latinx community. And I feel there's probably someone out there that I'm missing. Oh, last but not least is Be Serve, which is our military community. Last week was Veterans Day, so I can't forget about them. And so those have been some of the elements that we have come through, which have been very strong. We've had some major expansion in our community our research group community over the last couple of years. And we anticipate there will probably be 2 more resource groups that will come about. One from an element of diversity and how do we care about our talent that's disabled, whether you can see it or not. And then there's another one in our Asian community, and we serve our colleagues in that community as well. So those are the dimensions of diversity from a standpoint of our business resource groups.
Thanks for sharing those, Kevin. I want to ask the same question of Kosser. How does WSU TriCities navigate the different dimensions of diversity it has?
Great question. So just to give a little context, WSU TriCities is part of the larger branch of Washington State University. And so we have multiple campuses all around Washington State. And so one of the things I want to point out are our system-wide support networks. And so whether that's our multicultural centers that are located in Pullman that provide hands-on support to clubs and resources throughout all the different campuses, whether that's GSORC, which is our Gender Identity and Expression Sexual Orientation Resource Center, as well as Access Services and the Office of Outreach and Education. And so we have all these different offices, all these different programs that provide support to campuses all over the system. And so whether it's as simple as providing resources of local events, whether it's hosting events that we can partner with them on, or just, providing support and connections on a one-on-one basis, considering that the community in Tri-Cities is a little bit smaller as compared to Pullman, which is our larger campus. And so with all of the system-wide support, that comes from WSU system. But in terms of being on the Tri-Cities campus specifically, the Mosaic Center, which is where I work, is definitely a hub for conversations and questions that students, staff, and faculty have about these dimensions of diversity. And considering that it's still just one office, I love to work across campus with folks from different areas. And so whether that's working with our Access Center to provide and have conversations on the intersectionality of disability and being a member of a marginalized community, that's a very big intersection that doesn't always get talked about. And so we have the opportunity to work together and kind of have those conversations, as well as we have student clubs that are focused on different identities, again, these different dimensions of diversity. And so we can have conversations within those clubs about their experience. It becomes a safe space to have those conversations, to learn from each other, as well as building community and a sense of belonging within your community, within your identities here on the campus. And then on top of that, the Mosaic Center also hosts events. And so we tend to host events based on our heritage months. For example, Native American Heritage Month, Black History Month, Women's History Month. So all these different months give us an opportunity to have those conversations across campus with faculty members, with staff members that have all their different areas of expertise and their own identities that we ask them to bring to the table, and we can have conversations with staff, with students and our community members in a very authentic way.
Thank you, Kasser. I think one thing that has become obvious as we are having this conversation is even though WSU TriCities, Bechtel, and PNNL are major institutions within the Tri-Cities, we are somewhat comparing apples to oranges to strawberries in that for myself at PNNL, we are one of 17 national labs. Kevin Bechtel, you're with Bechtel Corporate. So you're back in Maryland right now. And Kosser, you're with WSU, which, as you said, is a part of the larger WSU TriCities, which is a part of the larger WSU organization, university. So even though we are all in charge of diversity, I myself, the diversity, equity, inclusion, equal employment opportunity manager, we all have slightly different roles. So I think our conversations will be somewhat different given that. Here at PNNL, in terms of how we navigate these dimensions of diversity, we have employee resource groups, and these are executive sponsored, employee driven groups, which are organized around different characteristics, dimensions of diversity, which are historically underserved or have been systemically underserved. And we have 8 of them currently. They were first stood up in 2017, at the end of 2017. We have 4 that are organized around race, ethnicity. We've got Black Community Connection. We have Asian Pacific Islander Resource and Outreach Connection. We have OLA, which is Hispanic Outreach for Leadership and Advancement, as well as NAPE, our Native American Indigenous People Employee Resource Group. We also have them organized around women and gender minorities. That is SPARK. We have ADAPT, which is Associated Diverse Abilities at PNNL Team. We have our Veterans Employee Resource Group. And we also have PRISM, which is our LGBTQ plus, our lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender plus, and allies. Employee resource groups. So we've got 8 of them, and those are our ERGs, which each and every one of them, I think, navigate different dimensions of diversity. We have events, we have meetings, general membership meetings. Our employee resource groups are organized around inclusion and retention of employees. They're open to all individuals, all employees at PNNL. They provide resources for leaders and managers, as well as all staff. And in addition to those, we also have Directorate Diversity and Inclusion Councils. Both our employee resource groups and our Directorate Diversity and Inclusion Councils report into our Lab Diversity and Inclusion Council. So we understand that diversity is not just limited to those groups which our employee resource groups focus on. There are many other dimensions of diversity, and that's why we have those different ways which people can engage around diversity. We also have our Life at PNNL, which offers other opportunities for employee engagement. We have a Taste of Diversity festival, which is something we've had for several years at PNNL. Sometimes employees offer to do cooking demonstrations, which we know for a lot of people, food happens to be one of the ways in which people engage with diversity, but we don't want that engagement to stop there. We want to make sure that people are able to continue having these conversations around the importance of diversity. So I think that's just a sampling of some of the different ways that all our organizations navigate these different dimensions of diversity. And I started talking a little bit about how PNNL has a commitment which underlies this support for these dimensions of diversity, but I wanted to give the opportunity to each and every one of us to talk a little bit more about that institutional commitment. Coster, would you like to start us off in discussing that?
Yeah. So, in terms of institutional commitment that supports the conversation around these dimensions of diversity, one of the biggest factors when we think about Washington State University is that we're a land grant institution. And so, what this means is that we were given land from the federal government to create Washington State University in all its different branches. So that way we can serve the people of the state, the people of the land. And so, our research, our education, and our practice is very hands-on. It's very involved. We have a lot of focus on agriculture in terms of STEM and, moving us forward in that direction, which, definitely a lot of our graduates go into PNNL and Bechtel. And so there's a lot of this hands-on connection to the community, hands-on connection to the businesses. I'd like to give a shout out to one of our classes, our digital technology and culture program, in which the project was that they would connect with the local business and support them in marketing efforts. Again, so this is using their educational experience, all the theories that they learn in class, and putting it into practice that benefits the communities that they live in. And so, being a land grant institution all across Washington State, our whole goal is to make sure that we're always in connection with our community, that we're always serving our community, and that DEI aspect is related to our community. Our community is very diverse, right? And so that continues to spread through every part of our institution. That includes trainings for staff, faculty, and students. And so there is a recent Senate bill that came out for Washington that requires institutions of higher education to provide trainings for staff, faculty, and students. And luckily, Washington State has already been doing these trainings. We have a community and equity certificate program that our faculty and staff take. And then we also have our social justice peer educators, which is our own students leading these diversity trainings for their students, as well as teaching faculty and staff about the experiences of students and where can we come and measure up to support our students and their needs. And so with all of these assets of being a land grant institution, of these trainings, it continues to reiterate this idea that as a community, we can all belong and work together with all of our different, skills, with all of our different passions to better our community and serve our community as an institution that is connected to the community. Yeah.
Diversity is all about people. So that is so encouraging to hear how connected WSU TriCities is to the communities that we serve. What about you, Kevin? You want to talk a little bit about Bechtel's institutional commitment?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you landed on people. For us, people are our greatest asset. We always say that, and it always comes back to our people and what are we doing for our people, which is why it was important for us that our commitment took a different shape and size and a different awakening that happened in 2020. When you think about George Floyd and his killing and the things that happened back then, that's when our commitment and our organization's um, intention changed for the right reason. We were doing it. We're a private organization, and so for us, doing what we do in this space, DE&I is really a commitment and a passion of us, of our owners of the company and the Bechtel family and the individuals that work there as well. And so this year, when we finally were able to declare, here's the foundation backbone that we have for our commitment and our roadmap and our action plan, and we now have a D&I dashboard that our colleagues can utilize to see where we're at and where we're progressing. That became what we, for lack of better words, call our briefcase. And so for us now, when we walk around the organization, we walk around the businesses, and we walk around the communities that we serve, which are our customers, and communities that we're in, and the organizations that we partner with, we utilize this toolkit as the way to be able to help understand exactly where we're going to go. Our messaging has to follow that as well. So community is very key. People, number one, and community is key because you definitely have to, if you think about DE&I and the communities that you serve, you want to make sure that what you look like resembles the communities that you're in. And how are we building the communities up to be able to make sure they have sustainable long-term health and wealth from a standpoint of knowledge and growth when we leave there, as well as while we're there. And I recently sat in an advisory board meeting last week with a university, one of the partners that we are committed to. And we sat there and I gave a presentation for about 25 minutes to this board about, one, what is the institution's commitment to change how they look? What is the institution's commitment to advance more talent within their departments? What is the institution's commitment to make sure that when they're doing the good work, when DE&I is in, what are the things that they're going to help gauge their accountability and success on? And honestly, it was the first time in this advisory board group that I participated in, that we actually had these discussions. And now, as a result of that, we're actually going to start taking more tangible actions relative to how this advisory board supports the School of Engineering, as well as supports what the university will do at institutional level. And I think that was important if we really want to serve our students, if we want to serve our people, if we want to serve our talent, that is the future for us in the spaces that we're in. Then we need to make sure we go into the communities that we serve and provide that level of commitment that not only exists at our organizational level, but we drive that down to the communities and build up the communities for the industry. And it's not necessarily something that's really only going to be right for Bechtel, but for the engineering construction community in general. And so for us, the other piece that happened is, as the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer for the organization, that another switch happened, that they actually created an Office of Diversity and Inclusion, and now report to the C-suite. And that has been a game changer for us as an organization, that the commitment has really been instilled upon what we choose to do and how do we link that up to what we do as a performance measure and profit and loss for our customers, and how do we deliver. And so I'm excited about how do we take that and now build on this foundation to allow us to start progressing in some areas, help us from a standpoint of onboarding with key talent that's out there, help us to sustain those resource group communities that when our colleagues need something and they actually can help us address particular issues that we have in our organization from a policy and a practice standpoint, those are the things that we want to do and lean on our employees and our people to help us get where we need to be. So our commitment has really taken a shift. It's really in the right direction. I will tell you, last week I sat in a courageous leadership workshop session last week. And for a good part of me, I really felt that we were really moving down a path at some great urgency, and we still are. But I guess, for lack of better words, maybe I was naive to say that there is still a lot of hard work that has to be done. I think we all should remember that there will continue to be a significant amount of hard work that has to be done. And through this workshop, it really was clear to me that some of our colleagues are still not comfortable to talk about these key topics, dimensions of diversity. Some of our colleagues are afraid to take a risk to have a discussion and talk about these key things, which are going to be more important for us at the university level, at the lab level, at the private engineering construction level, for us to grow and have that workplace inclusion change, and our employees have a different an engagement process for us. So I'm excited, but I think we got to remember that the work is still yet to happen. We have to continue to have growth and drive a commitment that's going to allow us to have long-term sustainability in the future.
Great response, Kevin. And I know Bechtel has been at this for a long time, as has PNNL. I've been here at the lab for nearly 2 years, and I was doing some research regarding how long the lab had been working on this. And I saw in an employee newsletter back in 1991, the very same dimensions of diversity, which we now have employee resource groups, were being addressed at that time. Realizing that we had employees in the workforce who identified as such. And even now, even though we've been focusing on this for nearly 30 years, this is something that we realize we need to make sure we've put our foot on the pedal so we can move forward and have true inclusion around. And now, as you notice, with all our offices, we're focusing on equity as much, making sure that our communities have what they need to succeed. I also have courage in the fact that our leadership has been devoted to this for a long time. For over 15 years, there has been a full-time position devoted to what 15 years ago was called diversity. That's when it came out and got called out, not just affirmative action and equal employment opportunity, really moving beyond just that state of compliance to make sure we were really trying to focus on this diverse workforce. So we now have this Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, Equal Employment Opportunity at PNNL. You heard early on when Lori was welcoming us, PNNL is one of the sponsors of our Diversity Summit. Tomorrow you're going to be hearing from my boss, our lab director, Stephen Ashby. And I talked about some of the other ways our lab D&I council, our DDICs, we have Heritage Month celebrations, which Kosser was talking about. And I think this even goes back to the Department of Energy, which has a great focus on equity, on energy justice right now. Our national labs, we also have a DEI workshop, which PNNL will actually be hosting in FY22. So all over, I think we are really trying to ensure that we are not just doing the right thing, but that we're doing everything we need to be doing to ensure that there's the creativity, the problem solving, the innovation that comes with a true focus and commitment around DEI. So one of the things, Kevin, you started talking about is the change that's taken place over the last 18 months around diversity. And I want us all to talk a little bit more about how things have changed. I know for Kosser and myself, we've been in this role much more recently, I think. So some of this is stuff that we can talk about with our colleagues, but I know at PNNL, after George Floyd's murder, we had listening sessions that our lab leadership team held. Our lab director, Ashby, also talked with our Black Community Connection. More recently, we've had anti-Asian discrimination talks with the lab director as well that AROC, our Asian Pacific Islander Resource and Outreach Connection, had. I mentioned how our DOE has its Office of Energy Justice and Equity, and a lot more of the work that we're doing is focusing not just institutionally on how we are being a lot more true to DEI, but also looking at the content of our work, what sort of populations are being impacted by our work. I had mentioned that in 1991, we were addressing several of the dimensions of diversity that our employee resource groups now address, but we didn't have a PRISM back then, which is organized around sexual orientation and gender identity. And just in the last few weeks, PRISM, we had a National Coming Out Day. And it was really wonderful to hear how we are also talking about our transgender colleagues and our colleagues who are gender nonconforming. Even our ADAPT group, we now have a subcommittee that's organized around mental wellness, mental health. And that is something new as we are talking about our diverse abilities, not just looking at the type of disabilities that are focused on things that are visible, but some of those invisible disabilities as well. And we are also going to be focusing on autism. So that's just an idea of some of the things that we're doing differently. And we realize, and something I think that myself, having been focused on DEI professionally for a couple of decades now, diversity always changes. These dimensions of diversity evolve, and there's a certain amount of flexibility, I think, that we have to have around them. I know we'll always have careers, right? There's definitely career mobility in that human species evolve and change. So that's a little bit about PNNL. I'd love to hear more. Kevin, do you have anything else you want to talk about how Bechtel has changed and is doing things differently?
Yeah, I just put something out there just to expand a little bit more on that. We're on that talking tour as well. Let me just say this. Generally in the past, our position has been, leave topics that we're having now, leave them at the door. Let's not bring those type of topics into the business and start talking about those things. And based on our vision, value, and covenants, and in our mission objectives, it was easier for us to just say that and do that, because then everyone could focus and execute on the job at hand. And I think the biggest courageous, and you talked about courage, Tommy, the biggest courageous piece that we did as an organization is we switched the gear. And it caught some people off guard, right? So we were used to not talking about it, which I think is also part of the hesitancy in regards to people feeling more comfortable to talk about it, because they've been so conditioned not to. Now, all of a sudden, the gate's been opened and we can talk about it. And so what happens is now we have to manage how we communicate and be inclusive as we communicate. So there's a whole other layer on it. Before, don't bring it in. You don't have to worry about it. You don't have to talk about it, so you won't get yourself in trouble. You won't slip up. And now is, no, we need to talk about these things. How are we going to get better as a culture and as an organization, be more inclusive? Let's talk about them. So now we've got to teach our colleagues, by continuing to talk, how to be courageous, how to take risks, how to realize, and by the way, I'm going to say this, that you may make a mistake. How much have we always said, never make a mistake, never make a mistake. So now you're going to be allowed to make mistakes and learn and grow. And that is something difficult for some individuals in switching the gear. And then you have the issue of, why is this conversation making me feel guilty? Did I do something? And how do I turn from that? So, it's wonderful now that we're allowed to talk about these things and have conversations. And now what we're trying to do is teach our organization to be inclusive communicators and realize good intent, open up your mind and listen a little bit more, and have conversations and dialogues and have engagements with those that you haven't had engagements and dialogues and conversations with in the past. And we start to see the change a little bit. We still have some hiccups here and there, but it's been a great journey to be able to have an open mind and have these conversations. So I'll end there.
Great points. Kosser, do you want to talk about how things are happening differently? I don't know if you've been around long enough to see that, but maybe in the 4 months you've been there.
It's really nice to see and hear from others how things have been changing. And just I am part of that change. Being the first full-time Mosaic staff member is a big deal for the campus. The campus hasn't had a full-time staff member dedicated to working on DEI. And there are pros and cons to that, where everyone has the requirement and the focus to work on DEI. But to have someone that's a dedicated staff member that has the intention, right, to make sure that all of our communities, all of our identities are supported, there's a sense of connection and community, that really sets a good stage for WSU TriCities to keep on moving in that direction. And so having the full-time staff member that is also able to support across campus, right? I work with the student engagement and leadership office to support our identity-based student clubs that I mentioned before. So we have our Black Student Union, we have our Rainbow Alliance, which is for our LGBT plus members and allies, and we also have our Dreamers Club, right? And those that's an immigration focus, it's a culture focus. And so these are all opportunities that we can work together to make sure that across campus we're having extra support and we're having extra dedication to make sure that they can continue to feel supported by the institution and not just a student-led responsibility to continue teaching everybody. And I really appreciate Kevin's conversation around growth mindset, right? And that we can make mistakes. And I have that conversation with my students all the time. To be able to make space for another, to learn from another, you have to be okay with making a mistake here and there, right? But it's remembering that we're all connected. We're all trying to learn from each other, and that you take that as a connection opportunity to share your story, to share your perspective that can challenge some of these stigmas, that can challenge the stereotypes. And the more that we're in connection with each other, the more that we can feel comfortable around diverse individuals. There is a YouTuber that is going to be coming to Washington State for Black History Month. His name is Emmanuel Acho. And his whole series is called Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man. Amazing series. I'm super excited to have him come to campus. And one of his lines that I have on my desk is, proximity breeds care, distance breeds fear, right? And so this opportunity in the Mosaic Center, a specific space that's dedicated to supporting all these different identities and having collaboration between the identities, between groups, is so impactful that we can learn from each other, we can connect to each other, and all of our diverse identities and experiences come to the table and are part of the mission that we're driving. So, for instance, one of those things is we're advocating on campus for there to be a meditation room. And so this meditation room can be used in so many ways. For instance, we have many Muslim students on campus. And in the meantime, the Mosaic Center is a space for them to pray. We bought a privacy screen, there's a rug, and we have a headscarf. So any of our Muslim students are welcome to come in and pray. But once we have that space, a meditation room, those students can also pray there. But also for any of our students who are neurodivergent that need some space to decompress, that need a lack of stimuli kind of space, that's another space that could be utilized by them, right? As well as any students that might have virtual therapy sessions. This could be another private space that they could use, right? And so just having this one room, this one space can be used from people from various identities with various experiences that can bring them together, right? And so we're continuously having these support for clubs. We have support for spaces on campus, as well as opportunities for the students who show up to work together to share their stories and continue having that relationship with each other. Because again, that proximity breeds care and that distance breeds fear, right? The more that we're connected to each other, the more that we listen to each other, the more that we can learn from each other and build those relationships that even when you make a mistake, you know that there's no bad intention and that you're learning just as much as they are. And that's an opportunity that you can share your experiences and be in relation with another person while you're going through some of these really heavy topics, right? They're not DEI conversations aren't always, light and friendly. So, but just being able to know that we're still in connection with each other throughout the conversation. We're all Cougs here and we're all learning from each other. And so that really helps keep the conversation going and that collaboration across identities to keep on moving in that direction as well.
Oh, there's so many tangents we could go off on right now. You've brought up so many wonderful points, and I'm just looking at the clock. We have about 15 more minutes. But one of the things, Coster, is that you actually have that physical space, whereas I think Kevin and I talk a lot about the figurative space for these dimensions of diversity. And Kevin had stated earlier how once students come through WSU TriCities and they have that comfort level in having these conversations about these different identities and how these identities intersect, then we want you all to come to Bechtel, to PNNL, to try and increase that comfort level for all of the diversity that is in the Tri-Cities and all the other areas, even speaking globally, where we want to draw that talent from. And I know PNNL, we have a big commitment to ensuring that we draw from WSU Tri-Cities and a lot of the other talent pools here in our wonderful state of Washington. Our Office of STEM Education does that, making sure we have internships. We even have them for as young as high school students. And we have a particular focus for some of those underrepresented students, whether those be from rural backgrounds, women, people of color. And we are constantly seeing how a lot of these different dimensions of diversity end up manifesting themselves as we have students who become not just our limited term employees, but our full-time employees here at PNNL. We learn from you, and I believe that, as Kevin was saying, making mistakes is how we learn. So I think we're not trying to eschew those mistakes quite as much anymore. We constantly hear these days about giving grace, but in science and engineering, we're always talking about learning from mistakes. So if we're not allowed to make those mistakes, how are we ever going to learn?
Yep.
Right? Yep. Kevin, anything else you want to state about the space that we make for this diversity?
I think another piece, and I won't spend a lot of time, but I will just say this. Thank you to the university institutions for bringing us the talent that we're seeing today. To be honest, I just think that sometimes, some of us are not ready for that talent, really not ready, because of the cultural sensitivities that they all bring to each and every day, and the element of where they want to be and what they want to do. Just like for us, our project there in the Tri-Cities and attracting talent that comes from WSU and so forth. That's a great thing. The other piece is what we actually really want to instill in talent out there is to be comfortable enough to understand that for us as a global company, you may experience opportunities that bring you into multiple cultures around the world. And how do you adopt and adapt to that and allow us to have continued growth from a standpoint of cultural growth, becoming as inclusive as we are today, if not more inclusive, and how do we work to utilize that from a standpoint of diversity of thought and growth and collaboration in our behavioral framework relative to what we want to do as an organization. So I'm super excited where the talent is today and where they're going. I think we have to remember to make sure we make a commitment to that future talent that's coming, that may not be there yet, and get them really in the mix to be thinking about a career in the space, in the engineering, in the construction, in the lab space, in the STEM space, because I think that's going to be important. We need to continue to growth and expand that growth to have capabilities in regards to being the best in the world from a standpoint of what we do here in the United States and afar. And I think our institutions are set up exceptionally to allow students to be successful. We got to get them into the gates of wanting to do something in STEM and give them that awareness and attention to that excitement. And then I think what will happen is we'll be able to harness that talent into the collegiate space or a tech space or whatever it is, a trade space, to be able to allow them to support us in the industry. And I think that's a big thing that we all have to do collectively to make that change for the future talent to come.
So I'm curious, what guidance, what suggestions, how would you advise Tri-Cities businesses and organizations on how they can incorporate diversity programs or practices into their respective organizations so they can be inclusive of all these different dimensions of diversity? Why don't we start with you, Kosser?
There's a lot of different ways I think that we can have these conversations. One is just being open to having the conversation, like Kevin was saying. This is a new conversation that a lot of businesses and organizations may not have had as much experience having these conversations before, especially, right, if it's a small business, right? It's a mom and pop business as well. And so just being able to know that you're on a learning process. You may be the expert in your field. You may be the expert in your organization. And that is very valuable information that our students, our graduates then will be coming into your space to also learn how they can use their education for that practical experience, but also just being open to hearing what our students and our graduates have to say and just being able to learn from them as well, because they're coming from this space where these conversations are happening quite commonly, right? And so students want to see how they can bring their values of sustainability and equity and access into their workforce. And so as long as organizations and businesses are ready to have those conversations and be willing to be learners, I think that's a great perspective that I think that both can meet in that halfway point. And if I were to give one specific way that our organizations can make space for this is by regular use of pronouns in your introduction to other folks, whether that's in your email signature, whether that's in any of these ways, right? In your business card, right? Having your pronouns. And when someone shares their pronouns that's outside of this binary, right? Just being able to practice what that feels like and be able to make that a norm. I think that's one way in terms of, especially for our lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, gender nonconforming community members, that we can make sure that we're keeping that safe environment. And so that puts it into practice, right? Instead of just having a flag on your window, which is great, and it makes for inclusive spaces as you're walking around businesses, but also in terms of practice, I think that's one specific way that I would recommend for businesses and organizations and just people in general to try to work in that direction as well.
Thank you, Coster. What about you, Kevin? What takeaways do you have?
Yeah, I mean, there's many things, and I think you hit something about the smaller companies versus the bigger companies. But a couple of things, for companies out there that have some type of data and kind of understand the engagement of your population, I think there is something to be said about what that data is telling you in regards to which direction you should go. Um, there's a sense that when colleagues feel very comfortable and trusting in an organization, they're going to tell you exactly how they feel and what they like versus they don't like. And I think you can lean on that data to help you build a path in regards to what you should do to help them. You talked about the proximity factor. I have a whole nother concept in regards to what our colleagues talked about that, because there's something about proximity, and when you're engaging with talent, you tend to engage with the talent that you always have a proximity to or a relationship with, and not for those that you don't. And I think if companies don't have data like employee engagement data, then go out there and talk to your colleagues to understand what are the things that they need, that they're missing, what's driving your attrition, what's driving your promotion value, what's not driving promotions to the right individuals. Are you looking at your data in a different way? Are you seeing certain trends happening in your talent pool and things like that? And really start to understand what should you do differently. But also at the same time, start having those what we call mentoring session, but reverse mentoring session, for lack of a better word. Start talking to people that don't look like you. Start engaging with people in your company that don't share the same passion or thought process as you, and start to really engage in a different way. And maybe what happens is you can do something as easy as engage in your community and do something with an organization that you've never worked with before to help understand how that organization can be a great source of talent for you. Have you ever engaged in a organization that fosters disabled colleagues and trains them to be successful talent in the long run? Have you engaged with that? I have a an older child that was born with Down syndrome, and just to see him being engaged in a community and have a thriving career is wonderful. So how are you engaging in that arena? Are you engaging in your veteran workforce that's there? And how are you engaging with practice with WSU to understand what that talent source should do? And maybe you just become a partner and not necessarily think about talent in the long run. So I think the more you put yourself out there to engage, the more you start seeing things differently, will allow you to help understand exactly a path forward that you want for your organization.
Mm. I keep on thinking yes, yes, yes to everything that you all are saying. Here in the Tri-Cities, we actually do have a lot of diversity when you look at all those different dimensions. And part of what we have to do, part of what workplaces have to do, is just be open to it. Gather together those individuals who have a passion or an interest around inclusion. Have them start meeting regularly, but also make sure that there are those with some authority, those with some ability to make change who are a part of those conversations. Because we find that if those individuals who want to make some sort of change around D&I are not aligned enough with the larger mission of the organization, and aren't a part of that strategy for growth, then nothing happens. And talking is really wonderful, which we're going to be doing, but you have to make sure that you come up with a plan about how to make change and put some metrics in there. We know you always hear about talking the talk, but you've got to walk the talk as well. And those who don't have metrics around diversity, no one's going to do it. And last of all, make sure you get someone like Kevin or Kosser, or myself, who's in there, who's actually charged with making sure DEI are a part of your overall strategy. Someone who's on task to make that happen. And those are some of the ways that you can be sure that your organization is truly navigating those dimensions of diversity and about to make some change for this new Tri-Cities that we are embodying, and trying to make sure that everyone here can reach their full potential. So Lori, did we do it?
You did it. You did it. Thank you so much, Tanya, Kevin, and Kosser. What a great way to kick off our summit. This is really a fantastic discussion. So many great takeaways and just really, really rich conversation. So we greatly appreciate you being our lead-off session and all of the expertise and the passion that you shared with us this morning. Thank you so much. So our next session begins at 11:15, so please don't go anywhere. In this listening session, DEI experts from across the country are going to engage in critical conversations about what DEI work is and what accountability looks like as it relates to DEI. Don't miss tomorrow's listening sessions. DEI Toolkit Workshop begins at 10 a.m. Our presenter will offer great suggestions on how your organization can create a DEI toolkit and implement the practices described within. And then at 11:15 tomorrow, we'll be joined by prominent local leaders during the CEO Roundtable session. Hear how the leaders of the Greater Columbia Accountable Community of Health, HAPO Community Credit Union, New Edge, and Carbitex use effective DEI practices in their organizations. You can register for both sessions at the link in the Zoom chat. The Tri-Cities Diversity Summit keynote presentation will be held on Wednesday at noon. Keynote speaker Kuma Roberts will give you 5 quick wins to supercharge your business strategy for inclusion. Kuma is a diversity, equity, inclusion consultant with over 10 years of organizational development experience, specializing in the business case for DEI. Also, we'll honor the recipients of the 2021 Tri-Cities Champion of Diversity Awards. You're not going to want to miss it. So register at the link in the chat. All of the sessions of the Tri-Cities Diversity Summit will be posted on the Chamber's YouTube channel, Facebook page, and at tricityregionalchamber.com. We'll also email the links out to all of today's attendees. Please feel free to share the videos with your friends, family, and colleagues. Thanks so much to all of the sponsors of the Tri-Cities Diversity Summit. Special thanks to our premier sponsor, Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, our gold sponsors, Greater Columbia Accountable Community of Health, HAPO Community Credit Union. Our silver sponsors, Christensen Inc., Columbia Basin College, Energy Northwest, HPM Corporation, and Cadleck. Our bronze sponsors, Bechtel National Inc., BNSF Railway, Carbitex, Redder & Company, Sotheby's International Realty, and Washington State University Tri-Cities. Thanks so much for joining us this morning. Sit tight and we'll be right back with our next session at 11:15.